Good evening. You are listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, I have from the Great Midwest, RDV, as well as from the Central Florida himself, the young 20-something generation, whatever, Professor Pixel, aka Toxic Pixel tonight. Of course, we're covering the 1984 smash underground hit Toxic Avenger, a cult classic, a great B, C-level film. It's a Troma exclusive. It's kind of like the canon classics. This is one of those must-see types of movies because if you weren't there in the 80s and you're watching it now, you're going to be like, what the hell was going on? And I, as an 80s child, can sit there and say, when I saw this for the first time at a house party with everybody under the influence of something, it was one of the funniest movies at the time. Great sort of a midnight flick. And upon rewatching it earlier today, the consensus, at least from my mind, is it's still the exact same thing. This is the introduction to Troma films and the alternative type films that did exist in the 80s that you do not have today. Yes, it's a micro budget film. And for those of you that listened to us when we did Class of Nukem High last week, another Troma film that came out after this is 100 times better. And it's just great stuff. RDV, I'm going to hand it off to you first because I know you and I have talked about wanting to do this for a while. What's your brief, just introductory kind of thoughts about this film?
If you're a kid that grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, and didn't discover this till after you watched the cartoon, you were in one rude surprise. Not a
Yes, you
bad
were.
movie. It's not a bad. It's still a good movie, but it's nothing like what they sold you to the cartoon, whether they were superheroes and just bad, dealt a bad deal and didn't kill anybody. Nope, nope. This was still all right, funny, and like I said, Lloyd Kaufman is probably he's the only one that knows how to do these kind of movies. Make them low budget, but make them so great, and still make them gory, but also make them comedic as well. This is your dark humor. This is like your. This is what you take your you and your buddies would go be saving up. Instead of going to see other movies that are coming out, the big blockbusters, you see this at theaters playing. You'd want to go watch this because these are more entertaining, in my opinion. And then you can also take your girlfriend to this too if you want to.
Yeah, definitely a different type of film. In the 80s, we talked about how
It's a grindhouse movie.
it absolutely is. And there was definitely a subset of films like that that would come out because there was still this underground desire to see horror movies and schlock and those kinds of things too coming up from the 70s. But you wouldn't know it looking back on it because everything was so sweet and so nice and so syrupy goodness and rah, rah, rah American kind of stuff in the 80s, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you think that that's all the movies were back then, especially if you're a Stranger Things fan with everything they pop in you, no, 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 there was a lot of other things going on too. And again, the 80s had no problem with gore, violence, practical effects, which we'll talk about in a moment, and nudity. So we get all of that plus more. Extremely hot Jersey girls, which means they're very ugly but have a halfway decent body, and you definitely get that a lot in here, as well as the nerd character that we'll talk about, because frankly, let's be honest, the guy had it coming and nobody feels sorry for him. But I want to go right now to Professor Pixel, the 20-year-old guy that can't even be allowed to drink.
That's
Did
not
this movie
true.
trigger you, sir? Did it make you feel like things were inappropriate? Do you feel like we've come a long way in society in terms of our morals as far as just how ugly we were in the 80s? Do you feel more wholesome or less wholesome now after having watched this film?
This was certainly uh, no more disturbing than the movie we reviewed 2 weeks ago, Samurai, whatever, 2. Uh, but this was enjoyable. It was horrible, but it was enjoyable, which I can have fun with something that's bad, but fun. There's a lot of great scenes in here that they're just so stupid. It's so stupid, but you're able to enjoy that. You're able to laugh with friends, exactly, uh, because I mean, what else can you do with a movie like this?
Well, I think the thing of it is we've talked about this before when we talked about some of these really super low budget films. I'm a fan of a writer director person that can kind of pull all these facets together, because you can really get their vision of what they want. And if that's something you like, that's great. And I always go back to marking out for John Carpenter and his films, despite his political persuasion and his themes that he has in there. You can argue that the way he puts it, there's a cynicism to it. And it did not go well with what was going on in the 80s mainstream. And that's why he was always, to me, an underground director, despite a few bigger hits. That being said, you have Ty West, who came out with the movie X earlier this year. And I've been telling you guys since 2008, 2010 with House of the Devil, hey, here's a guy to watch. We talked about Nicolas Cage and some movies that he was been in with that are super low budget. In particular, the one whose name's currently escaping me, and that's why I'm babbling so much. But beyond the Black Rainbow and the Mandy is the one I'm thinking of that we've covered here on Extreme Movie Show. When you get something like that, or even something like Malignant, which is great, you realize that they had fun with it. You realize that something is as low budget and thrown together as the Toxic Avenger, you can go, yes, the acting's not great, but it can definitely be worse. The practical effects are absolutely spot on for what it needs to be. Most of the footage was shot outdoors on the streets of New Jersey. The whole idea here, too, is that the guy who was working with John Avildsen on an earlier movie said, I want to make a horror movie about something in a health club, because in the 70s, you had this health craze coming from, say California and up and down the East Coast. That's usually how these trends starts. And so that's when the whole idea of fitness and everything became a big deal. And it exploded in the 80s, not just with weightlifting, but the whole idea of making yourself a better you. So we have this theme of this 98-pound nerd weakling that absolutely does himself no service early on in this film with how bad he is. And I got to give the guy credit. He sells it really well, because he looks like he's 98 pounds and all that. But it's the movie where, the nerd becomes the strong guy through some no fault of his own, extracts revenge. You could say it's a love story. And it's kind of tacky and all that. But you've got to get these scenes moving along quickly and rapidly. And that's one thing that this movie does a lot better than, say, Class of Nukem High that we mentioned last week. So let's just dive right into it. The Health Club. It's kind of like almost like a sex kind of comedy thing with all the stupid stuff going on here. And we meet some characters that we get to meet. But first and foremost is 98-pound weakling guy. I want to take a back seat here because I'm familiar with this. Pixel, let's go in reverse order. Let's start with you, since this was your first watch. What was your take on the whole opening gamut up to the self-harm scene?
I mean, there's with all that was going on, it was pretty clear what they were aiming towards. Everybody is wearing I think the song actually says tight clothes, and that's the whole point. And we get to really meet our main groups, lots of diversity and representation.
Absolutely.
Yes, and most of them get killed. Equality. But we get to meet our main villains of this, our antagonists that are ultimately responsible for what happens to our little 90-pound kind of special boy. Special is the word to describe him, for certainly. They are just trying to be bad. He's stressing me out, man. And then they talk about how they have a kill list because they like to go out in the middle of the night and just run people over. And they each have
Bozo.
That's Bozo. Well, no, Bozo is being egged on by the blonde.
Yeah, and this is an extremely important point. It's the women's control over the men that has the men doing these horrible acts, because these women seriously get off and they have a point scoring system and they make their boyfriends run and hit people. And it's not very PC the way that it's described. And here you're like, these are bad people. And the women I'm talking about specifically, you cannot argue that.
The one part about it, though, whenever, because they actually do get to show them, they have one scene where they run over this poor kid on a bike. His mom or sister, whatever, says, "Be careful out there," and he's saying, "I will be," but you can't help it when somebody explicitly turns around and rams straight into you. But then when he complete with point system, yes, and when the kid hits the ground and he's still trying to crawl away, they run back over him.
Very graphically.
But very graphic, very graphic. But then they're all back in the car after the girls take the picture, and the guy in the back is like, "Oh no, we can't go do another one. I got to get up early in the morning for church." And they're all like, "Oh yeah."
So RDV, with this scene here being set up, obviously we meet a lot of different people in here, and I just said earlier, and maybe I'm looking for some support here, but this kid had it coming. He might have been special ed. It's not really clear on it. Those situations exist. Didn't know how to mop. The mop was flying in people's faces. I don't feel sorry for the dude. What was your take on this whole opening gambit?
Honestly, I kind of do feel sorry for the guy, regardless of how annoying it is. What they did to him was totally uncalled for, and illegal too, dude. But don't worry. I would say that their toxicity comes back towards them and causes them sweet karma. No, the girls, yes. Jennifer Babis, who if I recall was married to one of the other actors from the other movie we watched. I think it was actually the guy who got the blonde-haired biker leader. And then you had Cindy Mannion coming here for his place, Julie. So those women, and it almost seemed true, because women were if they're getting with a jerk, a lot of times they were just as nasty as the guy they're dating with, and they'd make fun of, they'd bully. It's easy to bully on it because everybody did. Peer pressure. That was the 80s. That's actually still in the 90s today. Well, I guess. But anyway,
it's nothing more than people wanting to have. Today we dress up in nice platitudes. Be best. Be your best you.
Yep.
You do you. YOLO. All this crap. And in the 80s, it was just more blatant. These guys hated seeing a guy that wasn't trying to work hard at being his best self, especially in the gym. And so I'm jokingly saying this in defense of bullying or whatever, but yeah, that's the whole setup for it. These people are just triggered by seeing the side of this guy so much so they literally tease him. The girl comes and sets him up like love, and everybody at the gym. It's not just this group.
He's just a mop boy, and he ends up using the mop later. In the movie, to mop up crime. And like I said, like if you kind of look at the Toxic Avenger, he looks like a better version of Sloth from the Goonies.
He does. Oh, maybe with a little bit more color, I would agree. I don't know what's in that Jersey water, but yeah, him versus Sloth. It might have been inspired by it, but this might have actually been filmed and completed before the Goonies, actually. So let's just think about
overall, the whole entire movie, like I said, I wouldn't say it's bad in any sense. Like, I thought it was great all the way through. Now, is it one of those movies where it was supposed to be bad and ended up being good because how bad it is? No, it's not that. This is a movie where you potentially do make it a bad movie to make it good, and that's what unfortunately Samurai Cop 2 tried to do, but it didn't work because the guy was so freaking old, and they figured let's just bring in porn stars. Everybody likes porn stars, and they just
and porn.
Yeah, I know, but that movie had its moments, but it was majorly bad. And I said Lloyd Kaufman, he has an eye for these things, and then his buddy who was also directing here is I think wasn't it Michael Hurst. Those two together, you put them in a movie. It's great. I just want to say real quickly, this is a kind of plug, and we're not getting paid for this stuff, but Troma app is a thing I discovered recently.
Yes.
Available for your phone, iPad, Samsung, whatever, and it's $4 a month, and you get access to every single Troma movie that's in the vault, plus new ones that are coming out because they're still making movies.
Yes.
So I thought that was kind of cool. I mean, I might try it out. It's only like $4 a month. But
yeah, I mentioned briefly that YouTube, I think, had dropped the Troma channel that they had where they were getting revenue from a year or two ago.
Yeah.
Somebody had complained about it. So it was nice that, with a company like that, they're trying to find ways as a business to monetize themselves and stay relevant.
You can follow Lloyd Kaufman, the director. He's still active on Instagram, Uncle Lloyd Kaufman. Check him out. He's just still doing stuff. They're even celebrating the app and all that stuff. It's funny. He's just seeing you're seeing Toxie, with Toxic Avenger. You're seeing him walking around with a mop doing a little dance in the background.
Nerdy Texan saying own Toxic Avenger 1 through 4 on Blu-ray.
That's
Here's
awesome.
the thing about it. I watched it on Tubi. The print was great.
Yep.
And and I'll say this, I always love it when I see a film that shows the Twin Towers there in New York too, which I keep forgetting. It's been about 20 years, so we don't see it that much. So they hatched this plan, the bad group there at the gym, 2 guys and 2 girls, and the guys are just lackeys. The women are all in charge. They have the power. They basically set them up where the girl's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Meet me in the room, and I want to do you," and you're like, "Okay, whatever." And
Yeah,
it's
she
hard to kind of keep that up.
seduces him and just to trick him, and that's why it's really cruel to the guy.
Yeah, they're cruel to him, and so he runs like a girl, freaking out or whatever. But like the last movie, jumps through a window and lands in this toxic pool of chemicals that were parked in front of the gym because the 2 truck drivers stopped to do some coke, and that's pretty accurate for the 80s, especially here in Florida. So here's the thing I'm going to say. You're kind of laughing because this is a little over the top or whatever, but you know what? What was really disgusting, when we talk about practical effects, even though we know they're fake, still can look pretty good. And even though the toxic stuff, do we really know what it looks like? But the bubbling and the gas, which is cheap level kind of stuff, still looks gross. But here, when he comes out and they'd made him wear the pink tutu or whatever, and everyone comes out and they're still laughing at him, you're like, oh, okay, that's enough. But the weird damn thing is when he ends up getting on fire and running across the friggin' street, you're like, damn, that looked really freaking good and disgusting or whatever too. And then before he got home and started to change into the Toxic Avenger, I was like, that was pretty graphic. And then when he gets home and gets in the tub, because he lives with mommy, only mommy, probably one of the earlier films for single mommy stuff. He's jumping in the tub and the tub's boiling and hissing its disgusting colors and he's in pain. I give the guy credit because he's not an attractive looking guy and he is a small, pathetic weakling, but he really does a good job selling it. And I pop because he's sitting there and the only thing we see on the wall next to him because he's laying down in the tub is a picture of mommy that he takes with him when he leaves the house. Because when he turns to the Toxic Avenger, mommy kicks him out because he's ugly. This guy can't catch a break.
Oh, Mom.
No, the effects, I thought they were special, practical as they were too. But it turns out that we see another group of guys that are trying to bribe a police officer who refuses to take the bribe, and they go to beat him up. And the guy's name is CIGAR FACE, and they have a she-male, a transgender, a CD, whatever the person is. I'll leave that up for interpretation, and a couple other people. But this is when Toxie shows up and literally rips their heads off, by the skin of the hair. And this is graphic. What did you guys make of this action scene?
I'm just going to go ahead and say a representation. Listen, I was not expecting the characters to be quite so colorful, and I don't mean a representation kind of way. I would love to be in that room when the people getting together were smoking whatever they were smoking to go ahead and write this script. Because this is great. You have Cigar Face, and then you have, what do they call them? Lady legs? Something like that. And
there's a few non-PC words and phrases thrown around in this film. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And it seems that the mayor of the town is completely behind this. And they're like, oh, they were running our drug division.
He was the calorically unrestrained individual that we saw in the last film, remember? And he was getting a massage laying on the side with his belly exposed. That was disgusting.
Yes. You talking about the mayor?
Yes.
Yeah. He was a guy in charge of the power plant, Nukem High.
Yep.
Pat Ryan is the actor.
I thought he did a fine job, actually. He seemed like he enjoyed what he was doing.
I'll just say the guy has guts.
Well, he does, right? So much stuff.
Does.
Well, we'll talk about that in the last act. Yeah, so we see Toxic step in, and of course we go through this montage, because that's what the 80s were known for, right?
Yep.
Of him saving people, and he does all the classic things. He He helps the little old lady crossing the street carrying her groceries, stopping traffic. He helps the kids that are going to get run over by the evil health club gang, right?
Yep.
So he's becoming a hero by day, but by night he gets triggered and he has these visions, this bloodlust, if you will. So he
Yep.
keeps going back to the health club to murder the original group to get his revenge. So you see that go on, and like I say, there's a lot of boobies, a lot of tan lines in here, a lot of 80s gym dress, which is kind of ugly and disgusting, but yet colorful and very attractive in a weird sort of way. It's hard to describe unless you lived it. And again, they're Jersey girls, so it kind of got a hot body, but the face is kind of
Yeah.
and that's not a knock because we're all guys. It doesn't. Things matter, but they don't. If you know what I'm saying. And they did a good job because the ladies in here, like I say, they make these guys, run these people over, and you're like, when you describe it, you're like, this is sick, this is disgusting. But they do it in such an over the top way with the effects and all that too. You can kind of laugh at it because again, it's like one of the best quotes in Stranger Things season 4 and in the current episode I'm watching, where the one daughter says, "It's a movie. It's not real. It doesn't matter. It doesn't count." When they're referencing Nightmare on Elm Street, and that's what it was like. You'd go to a movie, and the whole idea of, yeah, it's supposed to be stupid. Let's just go enjoy it. You didn't make it a big deal, but except for some of the graphic scenes in here, it's not. Which brings us. Go ahead.
I was gonna say we were gonna talk about Boson Slug.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love how different things he does. He goes after Wanda and burns her backside with a heater at the club, and then he later returns and goes after Julie, cuts her hair off.
Yep.
And then he goes for Boson Slug. I love the name Boson Slug for like a character.
I agree. They're good. One-word names mean you're a villain.
And it's kind of like for those who watch the Power Rangers, you had Bulk and Skull. They were just stupid names, but they worked for the characters. And whenever I watched Power Rangers back when I was a kid, it always reminded me of Troma, though. Troma, all the different names they used to use. Because you don't need to have a cool name. Like Bozo and Slug are just like so. Bozo is a common name, but Slug, it's like, how do you get that nickname? Damn. But yeah, they stole a car and he killed him, and then he ends up getting thrown out of the car, and then Bozo drives off the side of a cliff.
Whee!
There goes Bozo.
I think out of all my the major action scenes, my favorite one is the second big one, and that's the Mexican Showdown, because I have to say, in the 80s, especially here in Central Florida with all the malls and stuff, Mexican places were on fire. And yes, they're not authentic Mexican places like a lot of people bitch and argue about, but we had a lot of different chains. We had a lot of different types. Of course, a lot of people will say it was Tex-Mex or Cal-Mex or whatever. Didn't matter. Your humble host here, even worked at one for a summer where we would have 10-cent tacos back in the 80s. And actually, they were still better than any of the crap you'd get at Taco Bell a day. That's for damn sure. So it's interesting when they walked in, because they really tried making the places you would walk into very authentic, unlike today where everything looks the same no matter
The
what food
Mexican
they're serving.
restaurants it looked really 80s.
Oh, it was. And what was important too is that when the bad guys come in, this other group of them, this is where we get to see the introduction of his love interest, who was blind with a dog. And I'm against dog violence of any kind.
Oh,
The dog gets shot. It's disgusting.
I was like, Rob,
I was like, but because you clearly see the dog, even though his guts are splayed out, laying on him. It's just a dog laying there with fake guts. You see him breathing, so you're like, okay, I don't feel so bad, even though he's supposed to be.
That's the thing. You got the guy trying to shoot him, and then he grabs the arm and he rips the guy's arm up, and the guy doesn't even notice first. If you see the fake pump spraying 2 lines of blood, I was like, and then he hits him, knocks him out. Freaking up. I was like, wow, that's over the top.
No, but what made this scene? And Pixel, you don't get this in the sense that unless you've listened to a lot of our Tuesday night action films that we've covered, the Chuck Norris stuff and JCVDs. Everybody knew martial arts in the 80s, because all the bad guys here all of a sudden, instead of using their guns, started breaking out the martial arts against them. The kicks, and they were doing the guy even had the nunchucks. And of course, he ends up getting his hands tied and put in the fryer.
Oh yeah.
This is entertainment at its
he put
finest.
the syrup on the one guy. Ice cream over the syrup topping.
But see, that's stupid and it's silly because you're like, okay, this is dumb. He's choking the guy to death. He's waterboarding him basically with chocolate and the
This is what you
spray
see in Evil Dead.
until he
Remember?
takes the drill in his face too.
We watched this, and for those who watch Ash vs. Evil Dead TV series, they had a diner scene like this, and you had to kill the person.
Yeah.
And she used the girl Kelly in there used the meat mallet the bastard got stolen.
Yep.
And like it said, the low budget like horror or gore and stuff. If it's done well and you actually have it where you add a little bit of comedy to it, it can actually go really awesome. If it was just serious though, straight up just killing, no comedy whatsoever intended, then it becomes like, okay, it's not a different tone of a movie. And I like the fact that this is like a dark humor movie, in the sense of like Evil Dead 2.
What did we think of his love interest, the blind girl and the love song, and them walking together, holding hands, and all stuff, moving in together?
It was like this is so cheesy, so 80s. She's like, I don't care if you murder people, I love you. And I'm thinking like, and then they have the sex scene. I was like,
well, she wants to feel his face, right? Because she's blind, and she's like, you're beautiful. You're so muscular. She grabs his genital area, and she's like, oh. And then he rails her. He puts the hurt on her big time.
She's got her heels in the air. I was like,
that's how you're smashing it, Pixel. That's 80s all the way, buddy. Would you care to comment on that, Pixel?
I honestly can only think of my favorite death in this movie.
B-Boy's a sex scene. I'm not talking about that. That's filth.
It's okay.
I mean, what do you want me to say? He was still wearing his pants. It was very boring. That was very boring. When their first scene together, so boring. She was showing more skin when she was at their tent at the end of the movie. Come on.
You gotta realize it. He doesn't have to take his clothes off. He has a zipper.
There's no zipper down there. What?
On pants? Yeah, there is.
The sex
not
hijinks.
On tights.
Well, details. The sex hijinks. The point being is that's a major part of some of these Troma films, especially with Lloyd Kaufman films. He's done a lot of them up to this point, so this isn't like his first rodeo. You don't have that in today's movies. You don't have, okay, we're going to have the gratuitous, 2 or 3 second booby shot here or lingering over the body, lusty kind of dumb adolescent stuff. No. And there's something harmless in it. I think that when you don't have that in the film today, I think people look at old films like this and go, oh my God. And it's like, well, no, today when we're supposed to be a little bit even more open, accepting about boundaries and cultures and what's permissible compared to 30, 40 years ago, it's like, why wouldn't you see that in today's films or even more? Don't tell me people wouldn't watch it with the easy accessibility to adult content that now prevails that you did not have in the 80s. It was fun. It wasn't meant to be anything hurtful.
It was kind of funny because he has superhuman strength and all stuff of this. So he's like going having sex with it. It's like the Superman conundrum again.
Dude. Oh yeah, no. His body is completely toxic when people are touching it and stuff. But when he's ready to lay it down, then it's fine.
I kept thinking if you would have watched the last movie with us, you know what happens when you're toxic and you have sex?
Not good.
No.
Well, going into the last act, we find out that the cop that originally was supposed to be, bought over to the bad side with a bribe, who's kind of an honest guy, all the fans in this town, or the people in this town, are becoming fans of the creature, this toxic Avenger, because he's doing everything. He's even like, reaching through windows and opening jars of Orville Red butter popcorn for little old ladies and stuff and homemakers. And it's enough of a montage where it's done right. You're like, oh God, this is silly. So you have to have the big scene at the end where it gets extremely graphic. And so there's a scene here where a limo pulls up and this guy's pimping out allegedly an underage female. Who's like, hey, you tricked me or whatever. And they play it up for yucks, but he gets extremely graphic and saves her life and all that too. So he finds out that the head of this human smuggling ring is like this little old lady.
Yeah.
And this just came out of nowhere for me. He goes to like the hideout where she's at, and of course, you have to understand that there was a lot more entrepreneurship in the 80s than probably exists today, although today there's a lot. Back then, there were forms that were extremely popular you wouldn't think of being financially successful, such as car washes, literally laundries back then, which this one was. He takes the old lady, just throws her into the dryer, and then he does the no ticketing no washy thing, which to me it was one of the funniest lines ever in any 80s film, just the delivery and all that. It comes out of nowhere. But that's the scene where the
Yep.
alleged good guys are like, wait a minute, he murdered somebody in cold blood. We have to track him down. So much so that even though him and his girlfriend left their home away from home, the junkyard, they run away to Paradise, which is a little place in the park where they're like in this really crappy tent. So the evil mayor who's involved in all this, because he's in league with all that, he's pissed because the jails are getting overpopulated with criminals. He's not getting his cut of the action, so he basically puts a hit out on him, and everybody goes to whack him. And of course, him and his girlfriend are making out in the tent. But it's just like Frankenstein and the monster. Everybody's, except for the ending, everybody's on the side of the monster, and they make themselves a human shield so that it can't be taken down by the evil authority, which in the 80s we knew government was bad then.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. So they play that up for yucks too, so much so that the ending, the mayor comes out and says, you know what, I'm going to be the guy that has all the guts and stands up to the evil guy in front of everybody. And RDV, I know you love this scene so much. I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, the mayor, the fatso, is firing the gun at him, and it's of course it's one of those. It's shooting blanks, and you can see that it's like a prop gun. Yeah, and he didn't kill anybody, he's firing at Toxie, and Toxie keeps walking towards him, and then it's like as the mayor's like, oh, don't hurt me, he's backing up against the cop car that everybody's watching. The cops just stand there because they don't care. Near the National Guard's there too, and everyone's around. And he's like, "What's wrong, Fatso?" or whatever. He's like, "You don't got any guts?" And he just reaches in, punches him in the gut, and pulls his guts out, and he dies. And then he just walks away with his bride to be, and she's smiling, and everybody's happy and just cheering and stuff. It's just like, wow. There's one thing we really didn't talk about, and because in the director's cut, in the girls' locker room, there is an actor,
yes,
who has great gams. Pixel.
One of the most beautiful women of our generation and last generation, in my opinion.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Is
in this.
Yes.
Also, I didn't know this, but Lloyd Kaufman was working on Rocky.
Yes.
And
that Rocky, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
That's where he got the idea for this film.
Pre-production, and he just, because he said that, there was an article saying that basic horror films were no longer popular. So he claimed that he decided to produce his own version of the horror film. And he said, he wanted to make it basically a less bona fide horror film and more of a campy, superhero extreme with violence embedded throughout. And then he said, he originally was going to call it Health Club Horror. And I'm glad he changed it.
Yeah.
Because this works a lot much better. And
Toxic Avenger.
Health Club Horror, because he had been working on his other comedies, such as Cry Uncle and Squeeze Play, or his other two movies he did before this. But this, and arguably, you could say this is probably his most popular movie.
Yeah, I mean, basically all of Troma films
it got a cartoon.
Live and die with this one. I mean, they've been around since the 70s. Like I say, they're not new, but it's a situation where this is a movie that even back in the day, things were like the movie Halloween. I go back to John Carpenter. That was a low budget film, but it was only played in certain bigger markets. That's why a lot of films would start off, say, in New York or Chicago or LA, let's say, and they would stay there a bit longer. It was almost like if you're a wrestling fan, the old territory type days where you'd have things going on and it wasn't necessarily national, but then eventually it would pick up legs, it would be a back or plan B, let's say, film of the drive-in theaters too. So it had actually been out in 84, but it got bigger like in 85, 86, but it definitely was a cult classic, especially on the midnight film circuits when teenagers would go out and check these things out. And like I said, I would know when I saw it, I was like, wow. And this would not be one you normally would see as a major release. It's not going to be like E.T. It's not going to be like a lot of these wonderful family flicks that everybody could see when, like I say, you look at the content and you're like, oh my God, but there was tons of these films out there and they printed money. Most of them, not all of them.
I gotta ask, so when did the Laserdisc come around? Because was that after VCRs?
Well, you had simultaneously, I think, was it VHS and I think Betamax, which I think was Sony's at the time, if I recall correctly. But the bottom line is there's two formats. The other one was actually better quality at the time, but porn went with VHS,
The
generally
reason I
speaking,
asked,
first and made it really
the reason I
popular.
asked because this is released in May of 1984. Yes, May.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that's 30. That's basically 38 years now. It was re-released in April of 1986, 2 years later.
Yeah, that was more the big distribution there.
Yeah, so I was wondering if like that was going on to beta or VHS was it later, or because it means it was released in the theaters again as an encore. It was brought back in popularity. Maybe that's what it is. But yeah, this movie had a budget of $500,000, and in the box office, it made over 800,000. So it didn't really. I mean, it broke even and made some more.
Well, it's what happened with the whole VH thing in the 80s was that once it got critical mass for people to have some, there was a lot of issues with, whether you're allowed to copy something off of the television. What about renting something? And they were big and they were bulky, but the bottom line is that's how many of us got introduced to music, as far as having a cassette getting recorded, and the quality might have been great, but it's better than your 8 track. And I mean, you could have a great system, but for portability and doing it, you just go buy some tapes. The same thing with VHS. And it was a thing back then. About now, the legal explanations of what's called time shifting, what allows you to do it, which those same concepts are still in vogue today with DVRs. And so same kind of ideas now. And without really getting into it, the bottom line is a movie like this, without VHS and all that, you wouldn't have the secondary market that really exploded in the 90s. And that's why you had your Universal Soldiers, where you could have a career of these lower budget films, which extended, of course, in the DVDs and everything else there too, because of the business model for it. Now with technology, it's so cheap to make a film, and you can outsource a lot of the production aspects too, that you could turn it quickly. It's just that you won't get the big budget Hollywood release type of
Yeah,
distribution that you could. And that doesn't mean that's a way to make money. So again, somebody like this with Troma, once you made enough money off of this, it could support a lot of other films and take you into it. And that's why they went with the sequels for it. Poltergeist, obviously, to play on Poltergeist and other B-level type films. And so definitely a market out there. And we saw it with the death of Bruce Lee, in the 70s, people, spelling her name slightly different just because of the name recognition. So nothing new here to see, just whether or not it's entertaining, which is what we're talking about. But overall, I got to sit there and say this is a really fun film. It's definitely an 80s type film. You're not going to find a film like this today. It's got a lot of elements of that sex comedy kind of thing that was popular in the 70s and 80s that definitely died out by the 90s for the most part. You've got a lot of your 80s kind of trends that were going into it. The music, I will say this for one of my final thoughts, it was a little off, because it definitely starts out synth wave, but then there's some other stuff to it. And I like the synth wave going for it, because that really makes me feel like the 70s and 80s with it. But overall, it's a great fun film. I encourage everybody to see it. If there's only one Troma film to see,
yep.
Toxic Avenger is it. So let's go around as far as final thoughts there. RDV, give me yours, and then we'll go to Pixel.
Final thoughts: watch this movie, and then if you can, somehow watch the 13 episodes of the Toxic Crusaders. Came out animated series in 1991, and tell me what you think of that, because I think it's equally just as bad and good as the movie.
Okay.
It's, yeah, like I said, 13. I remember watching this as a kid. I was like, I watched that. I was like, dang, it's like, this is kind of cool. It's like, for being a animated show, completely different from all the other ones at the time. But like I said, like, it's then I found out like the movie is like, oh my gosh, but it kept the same concept, going against the same villains from this movie in Tromaville in New Jersey, going against American polluters, as far as toxic waste people.
Yep.
So
Well, the thing too is, you mentioned before how you had came across this backwards, where you had
yeah,
saw the watered down animated version, and at the time it was a big deal if you're a movie like you could be made into a cartoon, or vice versa. Star Trek had cartoons, or Lord of the Rings did.
Ghostbusters was the big
Yeah,
thing.
a whole
Cartoon.
bunch of it.
So
So
a
you
lot of
definitely
them.
could have a secondary
RoboCop
career on
got a
that.
cartoon. Rambo got a cartoon. That was the whole concept behind this. The reason, because Rambo had his own cartoon, so it's the same with Chuck Norris. They say, you're like, well, crap, if Rambo can have his own for being how gory that movie is and the violent it is,
Yep.
then why can't we just do this for this? And they did 13 episodes. I tried. It's probably not as fun as this, but like I said, it's interesting to see the concept in animated form.
Yeah, yeah. Pixel, hopefully we were gentle enough on you today because, being 20 something, there are certain sensitivities we understand that you may have currently. So we're trying to build you up rather than, knock you out in one whole blow here.
Yeah,
That's why
yeah.
Samurai
And
Cop,
if you're
was a
offended,
little bit of a
Wrap
plus.
it
Have
up.
fun.
Come on.
I'm just saying, we take into account anybody that listens, across the entire world here, no matter what your persuasion is or your political or sexual or whatever. But this is a fun movie. What's your final take on this film?
Fun is absolutely the way to describe it. And when we were talking about Samurai Cop 2, I guess that's what it was, 2 weeks ago. That was trying to be a horrible in a fun way, but it couldn't. It couldn't match this. The energy behind this was so fun. When you have some of these deaths, they're insane. You can't help but laugh as they're happening. Obviously not the kid on the bike, that's horrible. The funny thing is the church comment after. But when you're watching this, I wonder who wouldn't enjoy this. Obviously there's some people that are actually sensitive to this kind of thing, and to that I say, oh, well, I'm sorry, but this is a good time. And if you want a good time, watch this with your friends, but not with anybody else.
Yeah, and I will say this too as we wrap it up. Obviously we're keeping kind of lighthearted about it, but there's definitely the B-level film that was definitely dark and gross. And we've covered a lot of movies on here, like a lot of Charles Bronson flicks and some of the Death Wishes too, what some people really despised at the time too because of their nature and their lawlessness to it. But you had other movies like The Exterminator that would be like this, low budget, completely graphic, very vigilante, and you're like, yeah, this is kind of dark and disgusting, and maybe there's nothing redeeming about it. But again, you go back to it's not a new type of film. These things happen, and certainly what people were making over in Europe, it's no surprise we had films like this in the United States, but definitely another level of film existed in 1980s rather than all this rah-rah cheerleader crap. And Toxic Avenger, that's going to be one they're going to put in the vault and say, 50 years from now, I don't know much about the 80s, but for some reason this movie should be a part of it. So definitely one of those vault types. I totally agree with that.
And I just gotta say a recommendation for next week Sunday. I'm thinking Tromeo and Juliet.
Yeah, where we're going to bring the pain. I'm like Dr. Clayton Forrester and MSTK trying to put Pixel out of his misery in here. We're going to make sure we slip one in on you there too. But I just want to say thanks to everybody listening that earlier tonight joined us on our 6 p.m. live stream of The Prisoner, where we're going episode by episode, Professor Pixel and I. Tuesday night, RDV and I are going to be reviewing the Top Gun Maverick recent release here too. It's making massive amounts of great press. It's made a crap ton of money. I've not seen it to this point. RDV swears by seeing it. I'm actually not the biggest Top Gun fan. I thought it was okay. I will tell you that Berlin song was played 4 times every hour back on all the radio stations, all 3 of them we had here in Orlando at the time, the major ones. And to this day, I go back to Top Gun for being oversaturated. But thanks to an animated detective who would talk about a particular area that might be harmful or a zone of danger in Archer. I'm back on the Top Gun train. I'm looking forward to talking about that with RDV on Tuesday. So for RDV, Professor Pixel, everybody involved here at Xtreme Movie Show, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. As always, guys, have a good night and stay extreme. Good night.
Have a good Memorial Day, guys.
Be seeing you.
It was last hour, Pixel.
Oh, sorry.
Pixel plug.